Hello, welcome to VMC. I'm Dr. M. Today we are joined by a rabbit expert. Dr. Katie is here going to go through some of the things that you absolutely need to know if you're considering having a rabbit or if you do already have a rabbit. So join us. You'll learn something today. A lot of people think, oh, especially around Easter, it drives me up the wall. Let's get a rabbit as a gift. Yeah, I'm sure you do because I'm sure you see it all the time too. So people are like, you know what? We have kids. Often the kids are like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're like, it's Easter. Let's get them a rabbit as a gift. Should people be doing that?
My probably number one rule about animals and getting animals in general is they should never be a gift. If you're getting an animal, you have done the research. You should have done the research. You should know what you're doing to keep that animal safe and healthy. If you're giving an animal as a gift, that person may not have.
No.
So you may be putting that animal at risk. And oftentimes what we see with these gifted animals is either they end up neglected or they end up being abandoned. And with bunnies, this is a really big problem in many places. People will just release them.
Yeah,
and
it's awful.
Pet rabbits are not wild rabbits.
No.
Many of them will die because it's not the appropriate environment for them. They're missing out on a lot of skills that they've gotten from humans their whole life, so they don't know how to keep themselves safe. Many of them have never seen a predator in their lives. It is not good for the environment. It is not good for them. It's bad. It's bad all over. Don't do it.
I think people also forget often how many years of a commitment a rabbit is. They can have a significant lifespan, and it's a significant time and financial commitment. This is another misconception that I run into a bit. Well, quite often, I suppose, is that people think, oh, to buy the rabbit is relatively inexpensive. So then they anticipate that keeping a rabbit is inexpensive. But this is really a myth. It is not a cheap or a time, like it's also an expensive endeavor time-wise. So I really caution people about that. And I also see a lot of awful cases where families with younger children get rabbits because they think it's a great pet. For young kids. What age do you think is often appropriate?
Varies greatly from individuals.
Yeah.
But in general, and I hear this a lot, that a rabbit is a great starter pet. A rabbit is not a good starter pet. You should not be giving rabbits to children. I would say like less than a teenager. A teenager who's responsible, I wouldn't be giving a rabbit to. If you as a parent want to get a rabbit and you want to supervise your kids handling it, but you have to understand that's your responsibility and you need to be the one supervising, handling all the time and all of those things, because ultimately rabbits are pretty delicate. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of cases where very young kids will try and pick them up, and rabbits have this unfortunate ability to break their own spines with the way they kick out if they're not being handled properly.
Exactly.
So it is not a good pet for a young child, and
no, it's really not.
I honestly caution people against having rabbits if they have young children at all.
I have many times witnessed kids dropping rabbits because they get scared and they spook and they move suddenly and they're not handling the rabbit properly. And I've also witnessed what you're describing, where they're not handling the rabbit properly and the rabbit kicks and their back legs are so powerful that it ends up breaking the back of that rabbit. And that is a horrific, scary, awful experience.
Everyone involved. Nobody feels good about it. Nobody's happy, and everybody hurts a lot from a situation like that. So it's just better not to put a rabbit in that situation. Most exotics are very, very poor starter pets. A, because they usually have very complex needs, and B, because they're usually much, much more delicate.
Let's say we have people that are looking at this video and they're like, okay, I'm still in a situation where I think I could be a suitable home for a rabbit. Where should they be looking to source these rabbits from?
My top places to source would be, if you're willing to do a ton of research, then a responsible breeder is a great place to get a rabbit. But I would suggest most people getting a rabbit
do not do
probably
this
be
properly.
going to a again irresponsible rescue of some variety. So like the SPCA here, in certain places, that's going to be like a local humane society. And they often have young bunnies. Responsible breeding of rabbits is not a super common thing.
So look at the SPCA or the Humane Society first if you're going to be trying to find a rabbit. Okay.
That would be my suggestion.
So to round off this discussion, we're just going to cover what some abnormal behaviors would be, and if you see those, what they might indicate. These can be very, very, very subtle changes. So Dr. Katie, what's the biggest thing that people should watch out for?
Number one, and we've already talked about it, is if your rabbit stops eating for any length of time, you should be watching that rabbit really closely, because like I say, at something like 12 hours, it's an emergency really at that point. Also, bunnies, again, prey species. So if your bunny is a very social rabbit and all of a sudden it's not, even like very subtly, like usually when you come into the room, it comes to greet you and now it's staying in its hutch or like its little hut or whatever, hide, that's a pretty big sign that something's not right. Because they're prey species, they can't show that they're sick, because that's how you get killed in the wild, unfortunately.
Yes, they hide things as best as they can for as long as they can. Something else I would always tell people is if they're able to touch their rabbit without causing it stress, they should be checking for its body condition score regularly, because they can even just have a slight decrease in appetite and you may not notice that they're eating, just a bit less hay, but then you might feel a change in their body condition score.
You should absolutely be talking to your vet when you first get your rabbit about how to handle a rabbit to get a body condition, because that is not really something that I could describe in an effective way, but it is something you need to know how to do. A subtle sign in rabbits that people don't usually realize can be pretty serious is if your rabbit develops a head tilt at all, it needs to go to the vet. So I was just going to show a short video because I see a lot of people who get worried about this particular behavior. It's called a binky, and it is a very normal behavior. It's usually a sign of a very happy bunny, but people worry because these funny little hops that rabbits do, where they sort of jump up in the air and sort of twist their bodies. That is a normal behavior. It's a normal movement, and in fact, if your rabbit is doing that, they're probably very content, which is awesome. If you see them sort of flop on their sides, that's also sort of a contentment behavior.
Yes.
Behaviors I worry about seeing for a number of reasons. If your bunny is thumping a lot, they'll take their back foot and they'll hit it on the ground and it'll make a pretty big thumping sound. That is a sign that they're either very anxious, stressed about something, or that they're upset about something. So if you're approaching your bunny and it starts doing a lot of that, it's saying, please don't come near, like, I'm not comfortable with this. Bunnies do purr. And it's also contentment behavior, but bunnies can also growl, and that is an angry behavior. And you usually hear growling between bunnies, not directed at people very much. The only other thing I will say is if you ever hear a bunny scream, and trust me, you will know. It is the most blood-curdling sound you will probably ever hear, and it is
giving me shivers. I remember.
It's one of those things that if you hear that, you should be popping that bunny in a crate and going to the vet. Bunnies don't scream for no reason.
Medical issues that we'll notice with rabbits, honestly, a lot of them are husbandry related, which is why we spent so much of the time talking about husbandry. But one of the most common issues that I would see with rabbits are malocclusions or abnormal dental patterns of some sort. How often should people be checking their rabbits' teeth at home, or should they be going to a vet clinic for this, or what do you recommend?
If you can handle your rabbit comfortably, you should be constantly feeling under their jaw. If they ever develop like any pain, they sort of move away when you touch them, and that's not normal for them. Or sometimes you'll actually even feel the little bumps. That's something to look out for because they can develop dental abscesses. The other thing is if you're able to look in your bunny's mouth, and if you ever see front teeth, if they're not meeting sort of straight on like that, it is almost always a sign that there's something going on with their molars, which are the teeth that are probably the most important to a rabbit. You can see here on the left, that's a normal
rabbit skulls.
Right, that's a normal rabbit skull.
Cute.
And sort of where the lump is on the top of its head, that's where its eyeball is sitting. So if something happens with those top molars, it's pretty much right under their eyeball.
And this is why feeling underneath their jaw is so important. You can see with the abnormal side. Oh, that's so painful.
Some really, really bad issues on this right photo here.
And you can also see the upper incisors are behind the lower, which is just
that's also a super a not good thing. We don't like that.
No, that poor rabbit.
And also when these rabbits, when their incisors grow too long, sometimes the root can actually end up growing back into their mouth a bit. It's bad. So you can kind of see in these pictures why rabbits' teeth can cause some pretty significant problems. You should be checking your rabbit as much as you daily.
Yeah,
should be looking at your rabbit for, because like we've talked about, prey species, terrible at indicating when they are ill. It's one of those sort of costs that we talk about that people don't realize, but it's just, there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yes.
And many of those things are hard to handle.
One of the other incredibly common issues that I would see would be issues with the GI tract. Often it would be a slowing down of the GI tract, or what we call stasis. And often that was related to a poor diet. But if people are noticing a decrease in appetite, or that the rabbit has stopped eating at all for any number of hours, they should be seeing an emergency vet or their rabbit vet. When we're treating GI stasis, is there any kind of go-to treatments that people should know about?
The most important thing when we have bunnies in GI stasis is getting them eating again. If we can fix the underlying problem, we should absolutely be doing that as well.
Yep.
But if they don't get that nutrition in their body, they will go downhill super quickly. So a lot of times we will offer, like, we'll first offer something usually called critical care, which is like hay that's cut up really finely with other nutrients in it. And we'll often offer that and see if the bunny will just eat it that way. If they won't eat it, oftentimes we'll put it in a syringe and sort of put it at the corner of their mouth. And often rabbits will just eat it that way, which is great.
Kind of feed it.
Unfortunately, there are some cases in which rabbits need to go on IV fluids, or they need to be more sort of invasively fed, which I don't love. But again, if you don't get these rabbits eating, they will die.
In my experience anyway, a lot of them, if they're seen quickly and you give them pain management, sometimes we'll give them some fluids and then we get them on the critical care, a lot of them will pick up and start eating again. We already touched a bit on bumblefoot, which is another really common issue. Usually that's a problem when they're being housed on inappropriate surfaces and they get infected feet.
With bumblefoot, you should be able to handle your bunny well enough that you're checking its feet on a regular basis. So bunny feet in the front kind of look like little hands, so any pododermatitis will sort of end up there. But bunny back feet looks like a little sort of that, but then there's like a whole surface behind it, and you should be checking back here.
All of it.
This is the most common spot for it to start, and it can start something as little as like a little bit of redness. Like you don't want to wait till there's like a sore. You want to catch it at the point where it's looking a bit pink, which honestly seems very subtle, but it gets bad quick. So
it does. Yeah. You need to intervene ASAP. I wanted to touch on was urinary tract issues that we see with our rabbits. I know it's often again tied to inappropriate nutrition, but what's the most common urinary diseases that we might note in a rabbit?
So something called urinary sludging is sort of like the interface between normal and abnormal. We don't always consider it abnormal, but there are situations in which we'll consider it abnormal. That being said, if you see your bunny straining to pee, if your bunny is over in the litter box and nothing's happening, that's a big indicator that that's not just like we'll talk about this next time. It's a bring your
rabbit in right now.
Right away. That's my big one. And bunnies are also kind of prone to urinary tract infections, just because they kind of have the opening into their urethra and bladder is fairly close to the ground. Usually bunnies with infections will decrease what they're eating in a noticeable way.
One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, so I don't know how many people know about rabbits with night feces. Is this something that you wanted to touch on at all?
I think that's an important thing to talk about, because people we get kind of two reactions. People think it's very, very wrong because they're like, oh my God, it's eating its poop, something must be wrong. Or people see cecotrophs, which is night feces, in the enclosure, and they're like, oh, my bunny has diarrhea. These feces are stuck together a little more, and they're kind of like a more slimy coating. They usually have them at night, thus being called night feces. If you're seeing a lot of them in an enclosure, it's actually a sign that something is wrong.
Yes.
Because if bunnies aren't eating those, it's it's actually a pretty critical part of their diet. It's how they get a lot
Yes.
of their vitamin B. There's also a lot
Okay.
of other nutrients in there. So if they're not eating them, you're probably going to run into problems pretty quick. And a lot of reasons why they don't get ingested, sometimes bunnies as they get older will get arthritis. And
Yes.
and the funny part is if they poop these out and don't eat them right away, like if they can't reach them right away, often
Mhm.
they'll leave them.
So I'm just going to back up a step because some
Yeah.
people might not even know. So rabbits will ingest their food and then they will defecate out a softer, wetter fecal material. And then they actually eat that material again, put it through their GI tract a second time. And that's where they get even more of the nutrition out of these really hard to digest grasses. This is how their body is set up to eat. And then they will have the really typical rabbit stool come out as the second time. And that's the very dry little pellet type.
Pelleted feces.
Well, Dr. Katie, I am so grateful that you have taken the time to share all your knowledge with us today.
We're going to leave some links to some reputable places to look for information because
Absolutely.
there's a ton out there, unfortunately, that
Mhm.
is not the sort of
Not.
information you want to be following and can actually be harmful to your rabbit.
What I'm going to ask is if people have another exotic species that they'd like some more information on, maybe we can have them comment down below for suggestions if you'd be willing to join us for a future video. I'm very grateful for the time that you have taken today.
Thanks for
And
having me.
oh, of course, I look forward to us being able to work again on a future video.